Joining me now here in New York, Rick Tyler, MSNBC political analyst and former spokesman for Senator Ted Cruz. Also with us, Harold Ford Jr., former Tennessee congressman and professor of public policy at the University of Michigan's Gerald Ford School of Public Policy. You guys have got to get some shorter titles.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day. Happy Anna Howard Shaw Day, I should say. Rick, first to you. Does this White House have any credibility left?
I think this is a real problem. I think this White House is in crisis. It is inconceivable to me that General Flynn would have called the Russian ambassador, first of all, without the president's knowledge. And if he was going to call the ambassador, the #1 topic would have been sanctions. So he would have had to been prepared to talk about sanctions. And if he was prepared to talk about sanctions, he doesn't have any authority to tell the Russians anything about sanctions unless the president approved it. So it seems pretty clear to me that the president would have known about this conversation before it happened.
The president knew about it, but then did the vice president know about it? Because he went on national television and said that he did not talk about sanctions.
So either two things happened. Either General Flynn and the president knew about it and they didn't tell the vice president and left him out there, or the vice president out and lied. And
you seem to be calling that something of a conspiracy or a cover-up.
It just looks very clear to me. It's just inconceivable to me that General Flynn would have been freelancing on Russian sanctions without the knowledge of the president.
Harold, Maxine Waters keeps coming out, and she's a bit on the fringe for the Democratic Party by saying this, that Donald Trump is going to get himself impeached. Do you see a circumstance where that could happen?
Well, clearly, if the state of play is paralleled or mirrors what Rick has shared, you certainly could see a playing of events where Republicans may decide enough is enough. Certainly the Lindsey Graham, John McCain wing of the party is not fond of this president, of his policies, that is. And the fact that it's Russia that is the key core substantive issue here, one could see that. But I think where we are today, if Rick is right, let's take the other side and say the president did not know. I think it's equally troubling, and it shows that there's a kind of a wandering and a lone wolf policy there in the White House that allows aides to do whatever he or she may want to do. They've got to professionalize the White House, professionalize the Defense Department, professionalize the NSA staff and the State Department for a start. And if that doesn't happen over the next few weeks, you have to wonder if you're advising Xi in China, you're advising the North Korean leader or advising the Russian leader, which I'm not, you would have to be advising the three of them. Let's test this president, the new president of the United States. Let's test America, because there seems to be disarray and disrepair in some of the important agencies. So either way you look at this thing, whether what Rick is saying is true, you take the exact opposite side, it's not a good picture for the White House, the Congress, or more importantly, the country.
You both have deep ties to Washington. You obviously have conversations with people that are still working up there on Capitol Hill. What is the feeling behind the scenes, at least privately, about how this administration is going? Rick?
The crisis of incompetence, and Harold's right. It absolutely has to be fixed. The reason you have leaks from the White House is disloyalty to the president. These are people. Anybody who leaks is not being loyal to the president, which means the president has said this is a big problem, and it is. But the problem stems with him. People are not loyal to him.
What about Russia? I mean, this is a bad analogy, but if somebody accuses you of cheating on your husband or your wife with someone else, you make every effort to keep yourself away from that person, to try and separate yourself. I know it's terrible. Anna Howard Shaw Day. To try and separate yourself from that person, and that's kind of what we see going on with Donald Trump and Russia. There are so many questions surrounding his relationship with Russia. Why do they add to them by allowing these sorts of issues to come up, to be linked, to become controversial, get so loud that he has to ask for the resignation of his national security advisor or be given it one way or the other?
Well, that's the other thing, is why wouldn't he not have allowed Reince Priebus to force resignation? That would have put Reince in charge. At least someone would have been, at least it would have been a chain of command. Right. As I understand it, as Spicer said today, that the president demanded it. And so where is Reince Priebus? Where's the chief of staff? The chief of staff seems moral authority, but with regard to Russia, the president has made the moral equivalence between Russia and the United States. That's never been our stand. And so I understand he wants to have better relationships with Russia, but there is no moral equivalency between the United States and Russia.
I think it was Casey, and right before we came on, and said the White House had been aware of this for maybe 2 weeks.
Two and a half weeks.
The White House counsel's office. So you have to take...
Donald Trump has been aware of it for 2.5 weeks. The counsel went immediately to Donald Trump and told him of this. So my question, I think you were getting at this, if the Washington Post didn't come out and report this news on Friday and then on Monday, would the public have ever found out about it? Because they knew for 2.5 weeks. They said it was an issue of trust between General Flynn and the president. When is it an issue of trust between the White House and those that Donald Trump has around him and the general public?
you answered the question. I don't think there's any doubt. We probably would have learned at some point, because Sally Yates may have shared this at some point, but the fact that the White House, the president was away for 2.5 weeks, and all of a sudden it reached a level where he didn't find it acceptable, or he found Mr. Flynn's presence in the White House unacceptable for some reason. Why didn't that happen 2.5 weeks ago? The reality is we'll get answers to some of these questions here in the next few weeks.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.
That General Flynn was directed by somebody to contact the Russians that, don't overreact here, we may change policy. That's not a crime. I think that's bad form. It's probably inappropriate. It violates the one president tradition, but there's no use lying about it. I mean, what will get you in trouble if you begin to mislead people about what you actually did? The cover-up could be far worse than what they actually did.
The cover-up could be worse. That was Senator Lindsey Graham with our NBC producer Frank Thorpe just a little bit earlier today. Donald Trump doesn't really believe that that is the issue. He believes the real issue and the real story is why there are so many illegal leaks coming out of Washington. He wants to know, will these leaks be happening as I deal with North Korea? A lot of other folks say the real story is whether or not the administration knew about this conflict between General Michael Flynn's statements and to the public at least, and his statements behind the scenes. Now we know that they did know. Joining me now is Independent Senator Angus King of Maine. He sits on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and the Senate Armed Services Committee. Senator, thank you so much. Going off of that, we do know that the Trump administration found out over 2 weeks ago that there was a conflict between what General Flynn said publicly and privately to the ambassador to Russia. But they did not come out and tell the public about it. They did not ask for General Flynn's resignation for another 2.5 weeks. Can you understand why it might have taken that long?
No, I can't really. That was bombshell news. I can't imagine that the White House counsel didn't immediately communicate it throughout the White House all the way up the chain, and why it took 2.5 weeks when they knew that those statements, the categorical statements, I did not discuss the sanctions, were out there. It's hard to understand why it took so long. I would add, though, Katie, that the issue of the leaks is also a serious issue. You've really got two separate issues here that need to be discussed and frankly gotten to the bottom of. But because there were leaks, that doesn't necessarily invalidate the significance of the National Security Advisor being untruthful with his commander-in-chief and also with the American people.
I would argue that the leaks were what allowed the public to find out about something they might not have otherwise found out about. It didn't seem like the administration was going in a direction where they were going to tell anybody that, in fact, Michael Flynn did talk about Russian sanctions with the Russian ambassador before Donald Trump was inaugurated, which would have been a violation of the Logan Act. The administration calls it a trust issue. Others might argue it's a legal issue. In fact, some of your colleagues might argue that. So if they do believe that, can an investigation take place in Congress if it does not have GOP support?
Not only can it, it will. I'm on the Intelligence Committee. I'm going to be going to a meeting in about 20 minutes where we're going to be discussing this very issue. We have subpoena power, and our mandate is to get to the bottom of not only the whole Russian hacking and messing around with our election, but also were there contacts between one or the other of the campaigns and the Russians during the period of the campaign and right afterwards. And we know now for a fact that there was a conversation between General Flynn and the Russians after the election, and there's still an open question of whether there were contacts before, and that's exactly where our investigation is going to go. I think it is bipartisan. A number of members of the committee, Marco Rubio, Roy Blunt, Republicans have said quite publicly, John Cornyn, who's also on the committee and is the second in command in terms of Republican leadership, they've all said we've got to get to the bottom of this. We're going to go where the facts take us. And so, yes, the answer is, will it be bipartisan? Yes. Will it be thorough? Yes. And I can tell you that if it isn't, you'll hear about it from me.
Do you have any reason to believe that the transition did not know that Mike Flynn was talking about sanctions with the Russian ambassador, that he was freelancing?
That's, again, that's purely speculation, but it is a little bit hard to believe that it was just a random conversation, particularly where you sort of get into, you know, what happened next. The sanctions were imposed. The conversation took place the next day. We now know that they were involved other than Christmas greetings, which is the way it was represented before. And then Putin said, we're not going to react to the sanctions. And then President-elect Trump said, good for Putin for not reacting. I knew he was smart. And putting all those things together, it's hard to believe that Mike Flynn was acting entirely on his own.
Independent Senator from Maine, Angus King, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.
Let's go through how we got to this point. Despite some early signs yesterday for trouble for Flynn, White House counselor Kellyanne Conway said yesterday afternoon that Flynn was still in good standing with the president.
General Flynn does enjoy the full confidence of the president. General Flynn has said he can't recall, and that he had about 30 phone calls with I guess, leaders at the time, and since then 70, I'm told, with different leaders, and I'll just leave his comments at that.
By saying he enjoys the full confidence of the president, are you saying you're satisfied that he did not have those conversations, that he did not mislead the vice president?
No, those are two different questions. You asked me, and I'll repeat the answer, does he have the full confidence of the president? Yes, he does. Then you're asking me, what did he talk about with people when I wasn't on the phone? So the only way for me to answer that is to tell you what he has said, which is that he can't recall.
How many times does she go out and say things that are not true?
That are
and
blatantly
just,
false.
It goes by.
Blatantly
How many
false.
times? How many times?
Willie, it happens time and time again.
I don't think we could. I will not interview her. It's giving people dishonesty.
She goes out and lies, and you find out about those lies.
It's not worth.
A couple of
hours
the interview. Later. Like, or if she's not lying, Willie, she is actually what I've heard. She is so out of the loop.
Totally.
She's in none of the meetings, and she just goes out there and starts talking without having
blathering.
Well, if you're going to put her out there, everyone has to be on the same page.
Right.
That's the problem. That comes from White House strategy, right? You've got to have a central message that you're pushing out. There's reporting from CNN and others that say, take this for what it's worth, that say when she went out there, that was true as far as the White House knew it. Information came to them in real time, they said, when Sean Spicer had to go out and say that the president is reevaluating Michael Flynn's position. Do you believe that in the hour or two between that? The information that had been available to them, according to the Justice Department, for a month, that they'd sat on and done nothing with.
No. Come on.
I don't understand why she would agree to do an interview. Good booking by MSNBC, but why would she agree to do an interview under those circumstances?
It happens time and again with her. It happens time and again, and she's been out of the loop for months now. And she'll go in and get a picture with the president, do a selfie with the president, and say, "Oh."
Interviews are her chance to one up and suck up and make mistakes.
But she
can't do it.
David Ignatius
can't do it.
It goes to management structure time and time again. I asked Donald Trump one time. I said, in the middle of chaos, I said, "Who is your person? Who is the person that can come in and talk to you and tell you you were wrong, you were off base, and this is how we need to right the ship?"
Well,
and I'm sorry, he was silent, and he said, "I'm the person." He said, "That's the wrong answer." And it is the wrong answer. The President of the United States cannot be dealing with the day-to-day drudgery of running a massive operation.
Yes, but the buck does stop on his desk. My guess, and this is just speculation, is that between Kellyanne Conway's full confidence and Sean Spicer's were examining, arrived Jared Kushner. Arrived the person who does seem to speak directly to Donald Trump and say, "Wait a minute, Mr. President," and I do think I've covered so many administrations where the early months, especially in national security, were bumpy. I mean, I remember Ronald Reagan's presidency. Richard Allen, the initial national security advisor, didn't work out at all well. I remember Bud McFarland, a wonderful man, had a disastrous run for a time as National Security Advisor. These things happen, and often presidents don't step in when they should. In this case, Flynn is leaving, and the candidates are, from everything we know, outstanding people who will run a better process. This process is so difficult to manage. A president can't do it alone. But he has to have the right person, and hopefully now he's going to find that person, and then he'll have a reboot. He'll start over.
It is for people that are concerned about this country and this country's foreign policy. This actually, despite all the questions this raises, this actually is good for this country. Very good for this country if the president replaces, General Flynn with many of the names that we've heard this morning.
It would be really, really good. Right after Kellyanne, her comments, Press Secretary Sean Spicer said the president was, quote, evaluating the situation. Changed a little.
He's speaking to Vice President Pence relative to the conversation the Vice President had with General Flynn, and also speaking to various other people about what he considers the single most important subject there is, our national security.
By the way, I'm just going to say, as far as discipline goes, people might have said, why was he reading that?
Oh, please read it.
They need to do, and I'm dead serious, they need to do a lot more reading. They need to measure their words so carefully. They need to stop people like Kellyanne Conway going out
riffing
and giving bad information. They need to sit, they need to read text, everything. They have to strain every word. They have to take every word through a strainer, squeeze every word, and start being exact. Words matter.
But I'm sorry, but Kellyanne's not booking herself on these shows. I mean, how
do you know that?
Well, do you think the White House press shop is just saying go out and do this?
Yes, I do. Kellyanne is a free agent.
So you think she's taking phone calls and going on the show without talking to the White House press shop?
Conway is a free agent. And they have complained. Everybody in the White House but Donald Trump has complained for months that she is a free agent. She goes out, she says whatever she wants to say, she doesn't coordinate
serves
her message,
herself,
and then she comes back in, and they have to clean it up. Now, she will lie, as she does every time the truth comes out. She will say she's being victimized.
Because she's a woman.
She will then go in and get a picture with the president, and then she'll get the president to tweet something, and her staff, his staff, will have to clean this all up over and over again. They have been doing this now for 4 months. This is just, so you ask a good question. The answer is for everybody inside the White House, and I do mean everybody, but Donald Trump, she's a free agent. She goes out on their own, and they spend half their time cleaning up after her.
Well, if that's true, that's totally unacceptable for anyone in the White House to go out on their own without, I mean, you all know how this works. If you're going on a TV show, they have a meeting, they talk about what the message is, and they drive a message. If that's true, then that's staggering and stunning, and it can't happen.
That between Miller on Sunday morning with absolutely no information on the biggest story that you'd be asked about, and then his dictator-like talking, I mean, it's incredible.
What this all says, including the Flynn thing, is a lack of coordination.
You need a strong leader reporting to the President of the United States. A structure matters.
Structure matters, process matters. Process is introduced into anything like this in order to protect people. It's to make sure decisions and issues are vetted and to make sure there's a consistency of message and a rigor of decision making. That is missing here. And to use your phrase, the question is whether this is 2.0 now, whether the lessons are taken to heart and serious changes are introduced.
The first 10 days, John Meacham, and then we need to go to break, but the first 10 days of this White House will be remembered by historians as being chaotic because you had Stephen Miller. By the way, I don't know this kid. I've got nothing against him. Seriously, I don't know anybody that knows him. But he went around all processes. He and Bannon went around, went to the president, got the president to sign an executive order, which the president of the United States should not have signed, basically brushed aside General Kelly and the Department of Homeland Security. And again, it goes back to process. They paid, the president of the United States and the administration were thrown into chaos for the first 7 to 10 days of their administration because of the lack of process, because of the end-around runs. This is happening on policy, and it's happening on communications because there's not one strong leader there.
Yeah, writing the narrative of this presidency won't be very difficult. Just to add water. I do think it's worth pointing out that the acting attorney general told, informed the White House about the possibility of blackmail. The reason this happened last night was not some magical metamorphosis, but because it was leaking. Because the Washington Post was reporting it. And so I think it's worth pointing out that it was the nature of the possibility becoming public that precipitated this.
That's
it wasn't the
point.
fact of the National Security Advisor, the office of Scowcroft, Brzezinski, Kissinger, Hadley, Rice. It was not the fact of that being possibly a threat to our national security. It was just the fact that we were going to find out about it.
That's not good, and a very good point.
They had known the fact, Mika, for a month. And the question now that must be answered is who in the White House knew, and why did they allow the vice president to lie? Why did they keep the vice president in the dark? And why did they not even go to him afterwards and said, you've been lied to, and by the way, everybody in the White House but you knows that?
And another big question, did a man who grew up professionally understanding the chain of command conduct that conversation as a freelance move, or with the understanding of people around him that he was doing it?
Exactly.
All right, still ahead on Morning Joe, the ranking member of the Intel Committee, Congressman Adam Schiff, will join us. Will Congress formally investigate what's happened here? We have a big show tomorrow morning. We're going to speak exclusively with the leaders of both the House and the Senate. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and House Speaker Paul Ryan will both be on the show tomorrow. You're watching Morning Joe. We'll be right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.
And it has been. And, you know, Tim Carney, this obviously is not the end of something. This is the beginning of another chapter. If they thought that the resignation of General Flynn was going to put this to the side, it's only now added fuel and more questions to ongoing investigations in the House and Senate on the Intel committees. Marco Rubio said this will be now put in as a central question on those investigations. Where do you think this is headed next?
Well, I think Flynn was absolutely sort of offense number one when it came to the Trump administration's coziness with Russia. But the fact is, the question that Mika's asking that's disturbing, does Russia have something on Trump? I mean, that's sort of a big, deep question. That's not necessarily where it goes next. Next, we also have to ask, were there other communications? Was there anything Flynn did besides these conversations? Was there anything he did when he was in office that in some ways compromise or hurt the United States? Is there anybody else in the administration? Did Flynn bring sort of Flynn people along with him? And what makes me have some level of confidence here, again, as Joe was saying earlier, you see a guy like Mattis at DOD, you see a guy like Tillerson at State. There are actually pillars there that you look at, you say, okay, we can trust these guys, we can rely on these guys. And as sort of the weeds are cut out, the Flynn types, then you do get some confidence that any investigation actually could get access. As long as Flynn was there, this guy was unreliable. You didn't know if he was going to tell the truth to the public. You didn't know if he was going to tell the truth to Mike Pence, the vice president. And so you couldn't have been sure he was going to tell the truth to investigators.
You know, this thread has been pulled, and you don't want to go hysterical and overstate it, but there are a lot of people loyal to this government who are very concerned about what's happening today and very concerned that this is going to set off, rather than a calming moment, a huge power fight within the White House, because Flynn took up a lot of space. And whoever the new person is, whoever competent they are, it's going to take them a while to assert their authority in the proper role of a national security advisor. David Ignatius, you know, the president is on a parallel track, met yesterday with a head of state, has other meetings coming up with the Israeli prime minister. How do you think the world will view the departure of 3 weeks in the president's national security advisor?
Well, I think Flynn was mistrusted in many capitals. I think there'll be a sense, assuming that they choose a successor who is well regarded, of a restart and maybe a more straightforward path. I'd make 2 points. We referred earlier to the role of Vice President Mike Pence. I think that's really crucial. The ballast in this White House, the thing that's keeping it centered the person who kept coming back on this Flynn issue, feeling that he'd been misled, was the vice president. And I think his role is increased. He's a center for people now to come to. And then the legal investigations that are continuing. The FBI continues to look at the question of what were the Russians doing in their covert action, trying to influence our politics, and did they have contact with people in the Trump campaign? That cannot be turned off without massive firings. That's crucial. And there's a similar investigation by the Senate Intelligence Committee, and the members of that committee have bolstered themselves, have said we need to continue this, take it wherever it leads. It's the most important thing we're going to do in our careers. So those are two things to bear in mind.
Andrea Mitchell, really quickly, can you give us a sense of who they're looking at, who the top contenders are to replace Flynn?
Well, I was told that the top contender is Vice Admiral Robert Hertford, who he is the deputy commander of CENTCOM, a protege of Mattis, and someone who is highly regarded, a former Navy SEAL. Also, David Petraeus is going to be interviewed, they say, and we know that Donald Trump really does like David Petraeus, and there's a lot of support for him among Democrats on Capitol Hill. They think that, frankly, anyone would be better than Flynn, but they also think that Petraeus really could run this operation. Keith Kellogg, who is now the acting National Security Advisor, is viewed as a caretaker, but I think you're going to see a lot of changes and a lot of assertion by Mattis. Also, there's a circling of the wagons, by the way. Top officials telling me last night they don't think the Russia thing was the problem. It was that he lied to the president and the vice president. They're not acknowledging that there was a Russia problem, as Sally Yates warned them.
But Thomas Friedman, the Senate investigators, John McCain, Marco Rubio, Lindsey Graham, probably Ted Cruz. There are a lot of Republicans that are not going to mind digging very deep into this and figuring out what happened. And again, I hate to, it sounds so melodramatic, but they are going to want to know, and investigators are going to want to know what the president knew and when the president knew it.
Absolutely, Joe. We should not move on here to issues of staffing, who's going to be the next director. There's only one question I have in my mind. President Trump, did you know what Flynn said to the Russian ambassador? Did he do it with your approval? Did he do it with your instruction? When did you find out about it? What did you tell Pence? We're talking about this as if Pence was president, and Trump isn't even in the picture. This is, I think, one of the most serious national security affairs that our country has been involved in, certainly in my lifetime. Russia hacked our election, and we keep just moving on to Ivanka Trump's jewelry and Nordstrom's. This cannot be discussed and focused on enough.
What, Richard Oss, is the impact if the President of the United States did know about the conversation between his national security advisor, with whom he was extraordinarily close, and the Russian ambassador?
Well, then you're at political DEFCON. You're at the top, because I think then it raises real questions. I actually think the impeachment word would be introduced at that point, and at the risk of being melodramatic, that becomes a first-order political crisis for this president and this administration.
And Mark Halpern, you agree with that?
I think Sean Spicer, if he doesn't come out and perform exceedingly well in a few hours at his briefing, or any other spokesperson today to calm the horses on this, people are going to start talking about the profound implications of what's happened. Because the mystery about Russia now has become concrete.
David Ignatius, would you agree with that?
I have a feeling that our discussions are going to move toward even broader things than Flynn's conversation with Kislyak. What happened to Paul Manafort during the campaign? Why was he fired? There's an FBI investigation that continues into that and to other issues that are related. So I think the question of the Trump team's relationship with Russia is now front and center. I think President Trump is going to have to answer questions, as Tom Friedman said. What did he know? When did he know it? But that's just the beginning of this tangled knot of issues.
And as we keep peeling away at this, I think the next question will be, to Tom Friedman's point, was the phone call from General Flynn to the Russian ambassador? Was the relationship with the Trump administration and the Russian government some sort of a quid pro quo for meddling in the election? That will be the next step for the intel community to look into that.
Why did that conversation happen?
It is more important now than ever before that they get somebody in the White House. Again, either put Reince Priebus in charge and let him run everything, or get somebody else in there. Because Andrea Mitchell right now, this is a White House in chaos. And just listening to Tom Friedman and David Ignatius and Richard Haass and Mark Halperin, a storm is coming. And it's coming fast and it's coming hard, and they better be ready for it.
You know, a storm is coming, and North Korea could be just one sign of it. But the fact is, they need somebody there who has the president's interests at heart, not their own. And that person so far has been Jared Kushner. Jared Kushner is the only person, I would call him the Nancy Reagan of this saga, because I covered Iran-Contra. And it was Nancy Reagan that engineered the departure of Don Regan and knew what was best for Ronald Reagan. And, you know, you can laugh at me if you want, but I would say that the son-in-law has better judgment than any of these other people.
He does, but nothing like Nancy Reagan's political experience.
I was going to say, nobody would laugh at you for that.
He's a brilliant guy.
We've said all along, he's brilliant. He's a leveling wind. He also, though, has never been in Washington, D.C. before. He's never been in the White House before. They don't have anybody there in a senior position that has been in the White House before and that has been through this. And
Howard Baker.
Yeah, a Howard Baker.
They don't have a Jim Baker.
A Howard Baker, a Jim Baker. You know, we could go down a long list. No
Bob Gates.
White House experience.
Brent Scowcroft.
This is actually the time to call in Robert Gates.
There
Just
you go.
is. All right, Tom Friedman, we thank you so much. Andrea Mitchell, Tim Carney, Richard Haass, thank you. And Richard, again, even in these dark times, it's good to know there's a book
about
that helps us with
barbecuing.
what first?
Thank you.
Marinades.
A world in disarray.
A world in disarray.
Still ahead.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.
Other senior administration officials about the nature of his conversations. That caused a concern he might be susceptible to blackmail. In a resignation letter released by the White House, Flynn wrote in part this, quote, "Unfortunately, because of the fast pace of events, I inadvertently briefed the vice president-elect and others with incomplete information regarding my phone calls with the Russian ambassador. I have sincerely apologized to the president and the vice president, and they have accepted my apology." A senior official tells NBC News the president and advisors have been, quote, agonizing over what to do about Flynn for days. But ultimately, the situation became unsustainable, not because of the discussion of sanctions, but because he had lied to the president and the vice president. And a source close to the president says that it was the vice president himself who was a driver behind Flynn's exit last night. And good morning, everyone. It's Tuesday, February 14th. Welcome to Morning Joe. With us on this very big news morning, we have political analyst and co-author of Game Change, Mark Halperin, president of the Council on Foreign Relations and author of the book A World in Disarray, American Foreign Policy in the Crisis of the Old Order, Richard Haass, columnist and associate editor for the Washington Post, David Ignatius, and Pulitzer Prize-winning historian, John Meacham.
Mark
Good morning,
Halperin.
everyone.
Good morning, everybody. Mark Halperin, a lot to unpack here. Quickly, what are your big, what are the big headlines here?
Almost everyone I knew thought from the day that Donald Trump named General Flynn that his days were numbered in the job for a variety of reasons, including his ties to Russia. That will continue to be investigated just because he's departed. And the people the president are considering are very strong names to try to rebuild the National Security Council team and an overall national security team that needs repair. But it does raise questions about the president's judgment and about the White House counsel who knew about this allegation that he could be blackmailed.
For a month.
For a month. And whether he did something about it or not, most people I know who've had that job would have resigned had something not been done about it.
Now, Mika, you have been saying all along that Michael Flynn would be the first to go. You started saying it even before he was sworn in. You said Michael Flynn will be out first.
I think this is good news for those who've been concerned that this White House is some people in it that are really not cut out for their jobs and perhaps leading the president astray. I think that Flynn had a very, very too tight relationship with Donald Trump that also raised questions about the relationship with Russia, which still remains a big question.
Yep. And Richard Haas, the names, as Mark Halpern has said, that have been floated would be extraordinary trade-ups and would finish out a pretty strong foreign policy team.
Yes, except one, they're all military, so it reinforces the sense that you're going to have a military perspective. Two, you still got an awfully crowded White House, Joe. You've got the strategist, you've got now young Mr. Miller, you've got Jared Kushner. So the question is, what will be the real authority of this person? Will you be able to bring in the more than 150 Republicans, any of them who signed this letter? The natural Republican foreign policy establishment that would staff an NSC, staff an administration, has been excluded. Neither the Secretary of Defense nor the Secretary of State has a deputy, much less everybody else. So yes, these are all trade-ups. I agree with you, but there are bigger questions. Is Donald Trump willing to empower his new national security advisor, which I would argue is necessary if Donald Trump is going to be a successful foreign policy president?
And Willie, chaos in the White House, we're going to get to it in a minute, but Kellyanne Conway yesterday saying that Flynn had the full confidence of the president. And Sean Spicer once again had to go out and clean things up.
Yeah, just a few hours later he came out. That's the point at which you knew something was probably coming. Something was imminent. This is a significant loss to Donald Trump. Flynn was one of his earliest advisors, one of his earliest supporters, went out, put his neck out for Donald Trump time and time again during the campaign, and he sat at his right hand in terms of foreign policy. A lot of the decisions Donald Trump has made, a lot of what he knows about the world, were informed by General Michael Flynn. So that will change now. But as Mark said, the question remains, if the president knew about this several weeks ago, last month, if he knew that his NSA could have been blackmailed, why didn't they do anything sooner?
Well, and it goes to the point, Joe, that you've been making all along, that there are ways they will get back at you, and especially when you criticize intelligence agencies and the like.
It's so obvious. David Ignatius, we have been warning this president and General Flynn on the air for months that you go after the intel community. The intel community will go after you. They are the last people you want to go after.
Have more.
And General Flynn declared war on the intel community. The White House actually accused Sally Yates of the Justice Department of, quote, betrayal. And suddenly we read in the newspapers a cascade of stories that actually led up to this point. The dismissal of General Flynn, and Sally Yates, the one accused of betrayal, actually being the one who had warned them a month ago.
Joe, I think while that narrative obviously is compelling, I think it's wrong to think of this as payback. This really was about a loss of trust on the part of General Flynn, in particular with Vice President Pence, who's a central person in this administration. General Flynn's problem was that there was a record of the calls that he made with the Russian ambassador Kislyak, and that record became known to the acting attorney general and to others in the administration, and they felt they had an obligation to tell the White House counsel.
Sure.
And they did. And I think that the issue, yes, there's been a lot of friction between Trump and the intelligence community. I don't think that's what this is about.
No, that's not the headline here. But John Meacham, we talk about it every 4 to 8 years. A new White House comes in. They walk through the gates. They believe they are the first people to crack the code. And they go in with a level of arrogance that is soon stripped away very quickly. If you take on the acting attorney general, if you take on the CIA, if you take on the intel community, if you declare war against everybody, well, don't expect them not to punch back. And yes, you accuse Sally Yates of betrayal. I'm sorry, it's just the ways of Washington that it happens to be Sally Yates whose story gets told to the Washington Post, warning them a month ago about this. And by the way, that is the headline, that they were warned a month ago and didn't act on it.
Right. Seems to me the news reinforces two central concerns about the new president. One is that the freewheeling style is not commensurate with the gravity of the task of governing the country. And the second is that the entire overarching set of questions about Russia and this perpetual issue where Vladimir Putin and Russia, now the ambassador, appear as these persistent characters. And the question, which everybody's been asking on social media, the Howard Baker question about what did the president know and when did he know it, it does seem to me there's still some significant questions to be answered about President Trump's relationship, non-relationship with Russia itself.
And to that point, Mika, who knew in the White House? And when did they know in the White House? And why was the Vice President of the United States kept in the dark and allowed to go on television and lie and not have anybody go to him who knew in the White House that he'd been pushed out to lie? And the only reason we're finding out about it now is because a patriot did leak this to the Washington Post, did get this information out there, or else we wouldn't even known about it. Why was Mike Pence kept in the dark when the White House counsel knew about it? And he was sent out to lie. Why?
No.
And who knew? Who was Mike Pence the only person in the White House that was kept in the dark? Because we certainly know the White House counsel had to know. You got to believe the President of the United States had to know. Certainly the Justice Department knew. And if the acting Attorney General knew, did Sessions know? I mean, there has to be a very long list of people in the White House who kept the Vice President of the United States in the dark, allowed him to lie on national television, and then not correct it afterwards.
It goes back to the central question. What is the relationship with Russia? There is something. It's not nothing anymore. It's not mistake. It's not being newbies. This isn't Nordstrom's, just ethically inappropriate.
Right.
This is troubling
And
on a deep global level.
And there is, I think, a more central question to the daily function of the White House.
Yeah.
The president has assembled a very strong national foreign policy team, and chances are very good he's going to have a very strong national security advisor now to go with that team. But who's running the White House? The answer is not the President of the United States. That's the wrong answer. Who is running the day in, day out of the White House? And if you don't have somebody strong and one person only, then you have the executive order nightmares that go on. You have the vice president going out lying. You have one hand not knowing what the other hand's doing.
Let's hope that's
one
it, Joe.
faction knowing what the other faction doesn't know. That's it.
That's the benefit of the doubt right there.
You need to have one person reporting to the president or reporting the CEO. They have 6 weak people right now vying for the pleasure of the president's conversation.
The Wall Street Journal editorial page calls for just that today, and I think a lot of people in Washington are seeing that. You can't say the administration needs to be paralyzed now by looking at what happened, but they need to learn the management lessons, and any Republican on Capitol Hill who cares about America's security should be joining the Democrats in calling for a full investigation of what General Flynn actually did and what the White House has done for the last month. This is not small stuff. The Justice Department believed that the National Security Advisor was subject to blackmail by the Russians, and they did nothing about it, as best we can tell.
Also, you have to remember, this administration hasn't faced an external crisis yet, so there's some urgency here. We've got to get this done quickly. I also think there's a case now for revisiting that national security directive about the structure of the National Security Council. I would hope that they would basically use this as an opportunity to rethink it, the role of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the role of the intelligence community, the role of Steve Bannon and others at the White House. The new National Security Advisor has to be empowered. He has to be primus inter pares. If he isn't, this president, again, this will continue. It may not be a Russia scandal, but the problem of a lack of coordination, a lack of discipline will be now baked into the cake unless this new person
One can
has
only
real
hope
authority.
this ends here.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.
Joining me now here in New York, Rick Tyler, MSNBC political analyst and former spokesman for Senator Ted Cruz. Also with us, Harold Ford Jr., former Tennessee congressman and professor of public policy at the University of Michigan's Gerald Ford School of Public Policy. You guys have got to get some shorter titles.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day. Happy Anna Howard Shaw Day, I should say. Rick, first to you. Does this White House have any credibility left?
I think this is a real problem. I think this White House is in crisis. It is inconceivable to me that General Flynn would have called the Russian ambassador, first of all, without the president's knowledge. And if he was going to call the ambassador, the number one topic would have been sanctions. So he would have had to been prepared to talk about sanctions. And if he was prepared to talk about sanctions, he doesn't have any authority to tell the Russians anything about sanctions unless the president approved it. So it seems pretty clear to me that the president would have known about this conversation before it happened.
The president knew about it, but then did the vice president know about it? Because he went on national television and said that he did not talk about sanctions.
So either two things happened. Either General Flynn and the president knew about it and they didn't tell the vice president and left him out there, or the vice president out and lied. And
you seem to be calling that something of a conspiracy. Or cover-up?
It just looks very clear to me. It's just inconceivable to me that General Flynn would have been freelancing on Russian sanctions without the knowledge of the president.
Harold, Maxine Waters keeps coming out, and she's a bit on the fringe for the Democratic Party by saying this, that Donald Trump is going to get himself impeached. Do you see a circumstance where that could happen?
Well, clearly, if the state of play is paralleled or mirrors what Rick has shared, you certainly could see a playing of events where Republicans may decide enough is enough. Certainly the Lindsey Graham, John McCain wing of the party is not fond of this president, of his policies, that is. And the fact that it's Russia that is the key core substantive issue here, one could see that. But I think where we are today, if Rick is right, let's take the other side and say the president did not know. I think it's equally troubling. And it shows that there's a kind of a wandering and a lone wolf policy there in the White House that allows aides to do whatever he or she may want to do. They've got to professionalize the White House, professionalize the Defense Department, professionalize the NSA staff and the State Department for a start. And if that doesn't happen over the next few weeks, you have to wonder if you're advising Xi in China, you're advising the North Korean leader or advising the Russian leader, which I'm not, you would have to be advising the three of them. Let's test this president, the new president of the United States. Let's test America, because there seems to be disarray and disrepair in some of the important agencies. So either way you look at this thing, whether what Rick is saying is true, you take the exact opposite side, it's not a good picture for the White House, the Congress, or more importantly, the country.
You both have deep ties to Washington. You obviously have conversations with people that are still working up there on Capitol Hill. What is the feeling behind the scenes, at least privately, about how this administration is going? Rick?
The crisis of incompetence. And Harold's right. It absolutely has to be fixed. The reason you have leaks from the White House is disloyalty to the president. These are people, anybody who leaks is not being loyal to the president, which means the president has said this is a big problem, and it is, but the problem stems with him.
You can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.